I was standing in the doorway of my own bathroom, towels still wrapped around my damp hair, when I saw him there, holding a bouquet of gnarled hydrangeas like some ridiculous romantic from a forgotten decade. He looked surprised. No, conflicted. As if even he didn't understand how or why he'd ended up on the wrong side of that door with flowers in hand and a silence that felt louder than thunder. I opened my mouth, maybe to ask what he was doing, maybe to tell him to leave. But the words never came. We stood just a breath apart. He leaned in slightly, uncertainly, and I didn't move. I couldn't. There was a question in his eyes, one I wasn't ready to answer but didn't want to ignore either. I felt the shift in the air between us, and just as the world narrowed to the space of inches, the front door slammed open. "Savannah," my husband called out from the living room. "Did you turn the thermostat down again?" And just like that, everything froze. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question. Do you agree that everyone deserves a second chance after cheating? The first sign wasn't obvious. Not to anyone else, at least. But when you've been living the same day over and over again for 8 years, you start to feel the tremors the moment something shifts. It was a Wednesday morning. I remember because the trash trucks came early and scared off the neighborhood cats, like they always did. My husband was sipping his usual coffee, dark roast with 2 sugars and a dash of cream, while scrolling through some HVAC supplier newsletter on his iPad, completely oblivious to the world outside that screen. I stood by the kitchen sink, washing the same pan I had washed the night before, and the night before that. The birds outside chirped with irritating enthusiasm. The calendar on the fridge still showed last month. That's when I saw the U-Haul. It was backed into the driveway of the house next door, the one that had sat empty since the Millers moved to Florida last fall. A man climbed out. Tall, mid-30s, maybe early 40s. T-shirt clinging slightly to his back from the weight of a box marked fragile. I couldn't make out the label, but something about his movements felt effortless. No struggle, no rush. He glanced around, caught my eye briefly, and smiled. Not the polite smile of a stranger, but something more, amused. Curious. Like I'd said something without meaning to. "Looks like someone finally bought the Henderson place," I said to my husband. He murmured without looking up. "Yeah. About time." By noon, the man had made 5 trips between the truck and the house. On his 6th, he stopped by the fence that divided our yards. I was out there trimming the hedges in the same gardening gloves I'd worn for the past 3 years. "Hi there," he called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "Mind if I borrow your hose for a minute? Haven't hooked mine up yet." His voice had that easygoing tone. Confident without trying too hard. "Sure," I said. "Spigot's right there." He walked over and turned it on, letting the water run over his hands before splashing his neck. "You live here long?" he asked, not looking at me. 8 years, I said. "Feels longer." That made him laugh. "I'll take that as a warning." He introduced himself. "I won't say his name. Not now. You'll understand why later." That afternoon, my husband told me he had to fly out to Atlanta on Monday for a 3-day HVAC Systems Expo. "It's just 2 nights," he said, barely looking up from his phone. "I'll leave early. Be back Wednesday before dinner." I nodded. I'd heard the same sentence at least twice a year since year 2. The next few days passed uneventfully, if you don't count the steady rhythm of box unloading, hammering, the occasional curse word from the neighbor's open window. I pretended not to listen. I tended to the garden more than usual. We bumped into each other a few more times, once when he was walking his dog, a mutt with ears too big for its head, and once when I was returning from the grocery store. Each time, the conversations were harmless. Small talk about weather, local traffic, the lack of decent Mexican food within a 5-mile radius. But something lingered after each one. Like unfinished chords in a song you can't get out of your head. On Monday morning, my husband kissed me on the cheek and left for the airport. By lunchtime, I was sitting on the back porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the neighbor attempt to hang string lights from his patio cover. "They're crooked," I called out. He looked up, mock offended. "They're artistic. They're a safety hazard." He laughed and jumped down from the ladder. "Want to come tell me how to do it properly?" I shook my head. But I was smiling. Around 3 p.m., clouds gathered. Tennessee thunderstorms don't ease in, they attack. The wind picked up. Rain pounded the deck like it had a personal vendetta. I closed all the windows and started lighting candles around the house when the power cut out. That's when the knock came. I opened the door and there he stood, holding a bundle of limp hydrangeas and soaked to the bone. Water dripped from his chin. "Thought you might need a little color on a day like this," he said, teeth chattering slightly. I should have closed the door. Instead, I stepped aside. "You're freezing." "Bathroom's down the hall, there's towels in the closet." "Thanks," he said, walking in. And that brings us back to the beginning. To the moment where everything hovered on the edge. To the silence that was louder than any confession. To the voice of my husband calling from the living room, and the sharp, shattering return to reality. I turned to the neighbor, whispered, "You need to go. Now." He hesitated just a second, then walked out the side door without a sound. I walked into the living room with a smile I didn't feel. "I turned it down earlier," I said. "It was getting stuffy." He nodded, still scrolling on his phone. "Trash night," he muttered. "I know." I walked back into the kitchen and saw the hydrangeas still lying on the counter. That's when the doorbell rang again. I opened it, expecting to find the neighbor, come back for some excuse or another. But it wasn't him. It was a teenage boy in a rain poncho, holding a dripping envelope. "You Savannah?" he asked. I nodded. "Guy next door asked me to drop this off." He handed me the envelope and ran back into the storm. Inside was a single photo. Me, in the garden, smiling. Not posed. Not looking at the camera. And below, written in thick black marker. "You looked happy." The photo sat on the counter for the rest of the evening. I didn't touch it. I didn't throw it away either. I just let it lie there, face down, as if turning it over somehow turned the moment off. My husband didn't notice. He was too busy watching a rerun of some home improvement show, mumbling critiques under his breath as though the people on screen could hear him. By the time we got to bed, I could feel the distance between us physically, like an actual cold line splitting the mattress. He fell asleep quickly, snoring faintly. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the neighbor. About how close we had been. About the photo. About how stupid I was to let anything get that far. About how much worse it could have gone. The storm had passed by morning, but everything still felt unsettled. Midday, I stood in the kitchen, drying a glass, when the doorbell rang again. My heart jumped. I wiped my hands quickly and opened the door. It was him. He wasn't holding flowers this time. Just his hands tucked into the front pockets of a gray hoodie. His hair was still damp. "I came to apologize," he said, eyes darting past me like he half expected my husband to be standing behind the door. "For yesterday. For walking in like that." "You brought flowers," I said quietly. "Which makes it worse," he muttered, almost to himself. I didn't invite him in. But I didn't shut the door either. We stood like that, awkwardly, half conversing through a barrier that wasn't physical, for almost a minute. You seemed off, he finally said. Are you okay? I didn't answer. I just opened the door a little wider. Not wide enough to be welcoming. Just wide enough to let the silence stretch a little further between us. Then I closed it. 2 hours later, he was back, this time on the back porch. I had just finished cleaning the patio furniture when I saw him through the glass. I'll keep it short, he said before I even opened the door. I'm not going to bother you again. I just wanted to say goodbye. Goodbye? I asked, sliding the door open halfway. I'm heading out of town for a few days, he replied. Friend of mine needs help with his garage in Knoxville. It was such a mundane explanation that it caught me off guard. He shrugged. I figured, maybe a little distance is best. I nodded slowly. He turned to go. And then he turned back. Unless you don't want distance. He didn't move. Didn't smile. Just left that statement between us like a key dropped on a table. And still, I said nothing. That night, I tried to bring things back to normal. I made lasagna from scratch, the way I used to during the first year of our marriage. My husband noticed. This looks like an effort, he said, sliding into his chair. Just felt like cooking something real, I replied. He raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? Why wouldn't it be? He didn't press. He never did. That was part of the problem. After dinner, he went upstairs to watch a documentary about shipwrecks. I stayed in the kitchen, putting the dishes away slowly, methodically, dragging out every moment like it might somehow keep things still. Then came the knock. Again. It wasn't the front door this time, it was the side door that led into the mudroom. I froze. Looked around. Waited. Another knock. I opened it a crack. He stood there, holding a bottle of red wine. Apology wine, he said. The good kind. Bought it at that overpriced store near the post office. I thought you were gone, I said. I was, he answered. I turned around halfway to Knoxville. Why? You know why. He stepped back then, sensing hesitation. Just a glass, he said. No pressure. No assumptions. And that's exactly how it started. He sat at the far end of the dining table, bottle between us, glasses filled with careful restraint. We talked about nothing, weather, overpriced almond butter, bad drivers. The tension thinned just enough to make space for real words. Then the power flickered again. Not out, just flickered. We both looked up. I hate this house sometimes, I said. Everything breaks at once. I can fix a few things, if you want, he offered. I'm decent with tools. I gave a small laugh. I'm sure you are. We were quiet for a moment. Then I said, that photo. I didn't take it, he said quickly. It was from a security cam my buddy lent me when I moved in. I set it up facing the garden, never thought it would actually capture anything. But it caught you. Why give it to me? Because, he said. You looked happy. I didn't know how to answer that. I didn't need to. Because right then, lightning cracked through the sky again, and the lights dimmed before snapping back to life. We both jumped slightly. And then, without words, without intention, we kissed. It was brief. And when it ended, we both looked away, as if eye contact might make it real. Then he stood. I should go, he said, already walking toward the door. I nodded, heart pounding, palms cold. He stepped out into the night without another word. The next morning, I woke up early and tried to act like nothing had changed. I made eggs, poured coffee, and packed a small lunch bag for my husband. He was groggy, barely awake, thanking me with a kiss on the temple as he walked out the door. But the second he was gone, I opened my laptop. I typed his name into the search bar. Not my husband's. The neighbor's. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe a reason. Maybe a flaw. Maybe something to break the spell. And that's when I found it. The real estate listing. His house had been put up for rent 3 days ago. I refreshed the page, just to be sure. Still active. And right under it, a new photo. A living room I didn't recognize. Empty. Clean. Furniture gone. I ran to the window. The blinds on his house were shut. The driveway was empty. His house was dark. He had vanished. The house next door looked like it had never been lived in. Curtains drawn. No cars in the driveway. Porch light off. I stood at my kitchen window, staring at the vacant shell across the fence like I might catch some movement if I just waited long enough. But nothing happened. Nothing changed. By noon, I was pacing. The silence outside was louder than the rain had been days before. Something about it felt wrong, not like absence, but like abandonment. I walked out to check the mailbox. Just a reason to move, really. On the way back up the driveway, I looked again toward his house. My eyes locked on the side gate. It wasn't closed. Just slightly ajar, swaying in the breeze. I found myself walking toward it. I told myself it was curiosity. That I just wanted to know if he really left or if he was hiding from me. But that was a lie. The gate creaked as I pushed it open. The backyard looked untouched, no tools, no footprints in the dirt, just 2 chairs on the patio and the faint ring where a flower pot used to be. I stepped closer to the sliding glass door. Through the dusty glass I could see nothing. The living room was empty. Furniture gone. Walls bare. It was as if he had packed up in the middle of the night and erased all traces. Except one. On the kitchen island, just barely visible from where I stood, was a glass. Half full. And next to it, a napkin. I couldn't read what was written, but it was definitely writing. I knocked on the door. Waited. No answer. I turned to leave, but something in me hesitated. I walked back through the gate, heart hammering harder than I expected, and re-entered my own yard. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on anything else. I cleaned the pantry, refolded the laundry, even scrubbed the baseboards. Nothing helped. I was spiraling, and I knew it. That night, while my husband dozed on the couch in front of a baseball game, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back steps. The sky was cloudless. The air still. I sipped. Listened. Then I heard the faint creak of the side gate again. I stood up slowly. Nothing. Just the wind. I stepped into the yard, looking toward the fence. The gate was closed now. And the porch light next door was on. I blinked. The house had been completely dark an hour ago. I walked slowly toward the fence line, straining my eyes toward the window. Movement. Someone was inside. My chest tightened, my thoughts sprinting ahead of me. I told myself not to be stupid, that I shouldn't care. That it wasn't my place. But I moved anyway. The doorbell rang the next morning while I was still in my robe. I opened the door cautiously. It was him. Hair damp, shirt slightly wrinkled. He looked tired. And relieved. I came back last night, he said, not making eye contact. I saw, I said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. I left this for you. Thought maybe you'd come look. But I shouldn't have assumed. I unfolded it. It was a note. 3 lines, scribbled quickly. Sometimes running feels easier than staying. But easier doesn't mean better. I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing. He looked behind him, checking the street, then glanced at the front window. Your husband's home? Not yet. Grocery run. I'll be quick, he said. He looked at me like he had something heavy in his chest he'd been holding too long. I came back because it felt wrong to leave it like that. I didn't expect anything. I just wanted to see you again. You left in the middle of the night. Because I couldn't think straight. We stood on the porch in silence. Then, he turned and started to leave. And I followed him. We didn't speak. Just walked side by side down the block, across the street, through the small community park where I used to walk during quarantine years ago. The place looked smaller now, like the past had shrunk behind me. We sat on a bench, far from the playground, facing the field. The breeze stirred the grass but didn't cool the weight in the air between us. He looked down at his hands. I didn't plan this. Any of it. I didn't either. I think I wanted to feel something. And you made me feel something. The quiet between us pulsed like a held breath. I turned to him. And we kissed. No one around. Just wind and silence and 2 people doing what they knew they shouldn't. When we parted, I didn't speak. Neither did he. We walked back in silence. When I reached my porch, he kept walking. Inside, I tried to move like nothing had happened. I turned on the kettle. Checked the oven. Rearranged the fruit bowl. Then I heard my husband's voice. Did you get the mail? I froze. I forgot, I called out. I'll grab it now. I stepped back outside and opened the mailbox. Empty. But then I noticed something tucked under the welcome mat. A slip of paper. 1 line. Written in my husband's handwriting. Your smile is different lately. I stood there with the paper still in my hand, fingers curling around it, heart pounding harder than it should have. The ink was slightly smudged, like he'd written it quickly and pressed it beneath the mat without second thought. Or maybe with too many thoughts. I read the words again, your smile is different lately, and felt a wave of cold settle somewhere in my chest. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even a question. But it was something. That night I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, while the sound of the ceiling fan filled the dark like a broken metronome. My husband was already asleep beside me. 1 arm thrown over his stomach, face relaxed. At peace. I watched him for a long time and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd really looked at him like that. The next morning, everything felt louder than usual. The coffee pot gurgled like it was angry. The chair scraped the tile with a shriek. The cereal crunched in his mouth like gravel. I tried to act normal, but I could feel my body moving a half-second behind everything, like someone operating a puppet with stiff strings. He didn't say anything about the note. Neither did I. He left for work with his usual routine, keys in 1 hand, travel mug in the other. A distracted kiss on my cheek. Then the sound of the truck backing out. I watched through the blinds as he drove away. The silence that followed was crushing. By midday, I found myself outside, pruning plants that didn't need pruning. My fingers were raw from the shears, and the sun was too hot, but I stayed there. Until I saw him. He stepped out from behind his house, back from wherever he'd been. He paused when he saw me, gave a small nod, then turned to go inside. I didn't call out. I didn't wave. I just kept cutting until my knuckles hurt. I went inside, washed my hands, and made lunch I didn't eat. By evening, I still hadn't spoken to anyone. Then, just before sunset, the doorbell rang. I opened it without thinking. He stood there again, not with wine or flowers this time, but with a quiet sort of stillness. "I need to ask you something," he said. I waited. "Do you regret it?" he asked. It wasn't said with blame. Not even with emotion. Just plain curiosity. I opened my mouth, closed it again. Then finally said, "I don't know yet." He nodded, as if that made sense. Then he asked if I could come over. Just for a few minutes. Just to talk. I said yes. We walked the short distance between our homes, and the air felt like it was holding its breath. Inside, his place was still half empty. Some furniture had returned, but not much. A couch. A lamp. A dining chair. No photos. No clutter. It looked like a place someone lived in temporarily, even if they didn't plan to. We sat at opposite ends of the room, both of us angled slightly away, but our eyes kept returning to each other. "I left because I was scared," he said. "It got too real too fast. And I told myself I imagined it. That you were just bored." I was, I admitted. But it wasn't just that. I didn't want to be the mistake that ruins everything. I don't know if it's ruined. We didn't speak for a while after that. Then he stood. "Maybe we should stop," he said quietly. I didn't move. He looked at me like he wanted me to say something that would change his mind. And I did. We spent night together. It happened as easily as an exhale. No drama. No fireworks. Just the quiet truth of two people making a choice neither one could fully explain or take back. By the time I returned home, the streetlights were on. The air was cooler. I felt like someone walking out of a movie theater into a world that hadn't paused. I opened the front door carefully, half expecting to find him there, my husband, waiting with some look, some clue that he knew everything. But the house was dark. Quiet. The hallway light glowed softly. I turned the corner into the kitchen. And froze. He was sitting at the table, still in his work clothes, arms crossed over his chest. I hadn't heard his truck. "Hey," I said, forcing casual. He looked at me. Long calm. "Where were you?" I swallowed. "Just walking. I needed some air." "Dinner's cold," he said. "I didn't know you were back." "I came home early." I didn't answer. He stood and walked toward me slowly, his face unreadable. Then he held out his hand. I looked at it. Confused. In his palm was my phone. Unlocked. Open. To my photo gallery. He tapped the screen once. A photo of me. In his kitchen. Taken from the living room window. Another swipe. Me standing outside his door. Another swipe. The kiss. Blurry. But undeniable. I couldn't breathe. My husband's voice was almost soft. "You didn't even try to hide it." I opened my mouth. But there was nothing to say. I couldn't move. The air between us was still, but dense, like the moment before a storm splits the sky. The screen in his hand burned into my vision. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He didn't even look angry. That calm, measured quiet was worse. "You didn't even try to hide it." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to lie, to reach for some ridiculous story, anything to create even a sliver of doubt. But my lips wouldn't move. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. He placed the phone down gently on the kitchen counter and walked past me without another word. The sound of his steps up the stairs echoed longer than they should have. I stood there, frozen in that kitchen, as if stepping out of that square of tile would shatter everything. I didn't sleep that night. He didn't come back down. At 6 a.m., I found him in the garage, leaning against the workbench like he'd been there all night. The smell of motor oil and old wood filled the space. He didn't look at me when I entered. "I'm going to the office," he said simply, tying his shoes. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not now." And he left. I stared at the empty space where his truck had been. Then I went back inside and began cleaning. I don't know why. The counters. The cabinets. Even the junk drawer. I was scrubbing and rearranging as if I could erase what had happened by making everything look untouched. By late morning, I needed to get out. I grabbed my keys and left without knowing where I was going. I drove through town, past the coffee shop where we used to sit on Saturdays, past the dry cleaners, the bank, the movie theater with the flickering marquee. I turned into the parking lot of a small strip mall on the edge of town and sat there, engine running. Eventually, I walked into the Walmart, pushing an empty cart like I was supposed to be there. I wandered the aisles, tossing things in without thought: paper towels, canned beans, plastic wrap, a birthday card for no one. Then, as I turned into the freezer section, I saw him. He stood by the end of the aisle, squinting at the label on a frozen lasagna box, completely unaware of me. My stomach turned. He looked different. Less composed. Tired. I stepped backward, out of view, and ducked behind the next aisle, breathing hard, my heart racing like I was hiding from something dangerous. But then he appeared. At the end of the aisle. He had seen me. We stood there in awkward, suspended silence. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said softly. "I didn't either." He looked down at the box in his hands, then placed it gently back into the freezer. "I'm guessing he knows?" I didn't answer. He nodded to himself. "I didn't mean for any of this," he added. "Neither did I." A pause. "I should go," I said. "Yeah," he replied. "Probably best." I walked away, leaving the cart full of things behind. I drove home in silence. When I returned, his truck was already back in the driveway. I hesitated at the door, bracing myself. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee in front of him. Still in his work shirt, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He didn't look up. "I bought you coffee," he said. I stepped closer. On the table was a cup from our usual spot, his usual order, not mine. He finally met my eyes. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," he said. "I've been trying to figure out if I'm more angry or just numb. I never planned to hurt you." "I know." Another pause. "I keep trying to imagine what version of you decided I didn't matter anymore," he said, almost like he was talking to himself. "You do matter." "Not enough," he said. "Not in the right way." He stood and walked toward the door. "I need to go clear my head. I'll be back tonight." "Where are you going?" He paused, hand on the doorknob. "To the lake. Somewhere quiet." I watched as he walked out. This time, I didn't follow. The house felt unfamiliar without him. As if something fundamental had shifted. I wandered through the rooms like a stranger in my own life, looking for something to ground me. Later that afternoon, I got a text from a friend I hadn't seen in a while. She invited me to Panera for coffee. I didn't want to go, but I said yes anyway. I needed something normal. At the cafe, she talked mostly about her new kitchen remodel and her daughter's college plans. I nodded and smiled in the right places. I said nothing about what had happened. "You look pale," she said suddenly. "Everything all right?" "I'm just tired." She narrowed her eyes. "You've been tired a lot lately." "I guess that's just life." She looked like she wanted to press more, but didn't. Instead, she slid a muffin across the table toward me. "Eat something." I picked at the edge of it, not really tasting anything. We said goodbye outside. She hugged me a little too tightly, like she knew more than she let on. As I got into my car, I glanced toward the parking lot exit and froze. He was there. The neighbor. Standing beside his truck, staring directly at me. He looked like he was about to walk over, but stopped. And turned away. I didn't go home. I drove aimlessly for almost an hour, then parked near the lake, the one my husband had mentioned. I walked toward the water, half expecting to see him there. But he wasn't. Instead, I sat on the bench by the edge, listening to the small waves lapping against the rocks. A family was having a picnic nearby. Their laughter echoed through the air, sharp and distant. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my husband. Just 3 words. "We need distance." And a second message right after. "I won't be home tonight." The sky dimmed fast as I sat alone on the park bench, staring at the water that looked too calm for what I was feeling inside. His message echoed in my head, "We need distance. I won't be home tonight." My fingers were still holding the phone, but I hadn't looked at the screen in minutes. I kept waiting for a second follow-up, something softer, or even something crueler. But it never came. I drove home slowly, windows down, letting the late summer air push against my face. The sun dipped below the horizon just as I pulled into the driveway. The porch light was off. The entire house looked like it had forgotten how to welcome someone. I walked up the steps without purpose, unlocked the door, and stood in the silence that met me. There was no note on the table. No signs that he'd taken anything. Just the absence of him. I wandered the house like I'd never seen it before. The bathroom light flickered when I turned it on. One of the hallway frames was tilted, our picture from a Christmas party years ago. I fixed it. Then tilted it back. I slept in the guest room that night. Or I tried. Every creak and shift of the house felt louder than it should have. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and made coffee, even though I hadn't eaten since lunch. I stood by the sink and watched the neighbor's house through the dark window. His living room light was on. Without thinking, I slipped on sandals, pulled on a sweatshirt, and stepped outside. The night was still. Not even the crickets dared to make noise. I crossed the yard like I didn't belong to it anymore. When I knocked softly on his door, he opened it almost immediately, like he had been standing just behind it. We didn't speak. He just stepped back, and I walked in. We sat on the couch, one cushion between us, but not nearly enough space. Neither of us filled the silence. There was no need. The weight between us was louder than any words would have been. Eventually, I said, "He's gone." He nodded slowly. "Is it over?" "I don't know what anything is right now." I closed my eyes and leaned back into the couch, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. When I looked at him again, he was already watching me. And he didn't look away. We spent night together. By the time the sun rose, I was already halfway across my lawn, shoes in hand, skin cold with the bite of morning air. The birds had just started. The street was empty. The world didn't feel different, but I did. When I opened the front door, the silence was thicker than before. The air inside was stale, like the house hadn't breathed all night. I walked upstairs, dropped my shoes by the door, and went to shower. Afterward, I made breakfast out of habit: eggs, toast, nothing fancy. I didn't eat it. I just pushed it around on the plate until it got cold. I was wiping the counter when I heard the garage door open. My heart stopped. Footsteps followed. Heavy ones. He walked into the kitchen, his shirt slightly wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. He didn't speak. I waited. He poured himself coffee, didn't look at me. "I'm going to stay at my brother's for a while," he finally said. "Just until I figure out what I want." I nodded. He took a sip. "I don't think we should tell anyone yet. Not until it makes sense." "I understand." He looked around the kitchen like he was seeing it for the first time in years. Then he said, "You know what's funny? I used to think this was the most stable thing in my life." He didn't wait for a reply. Within an hour, he was packed. A few bags. Some shirts. One pair of dress shoes. He didn't even take his razor. Before leaving, he stood in the doorway, keys in hand. "I'm not saying it's over. But it can't stay like this." Then he left. And again, I was alone. This time, I didn't clean. I didn't rearrange anything. I just sat on the couch with my legs curled under me, holding a throw pillow like it had answers. The house was too quiet. At some point, I walked out to the mailbox, though I knew there was no mail. When I turned to go back inside, I saw a figure by the end of the driveway. Him. He didn't move toward me, and I didn't go to him. We just looked at each other. He raised his hand in a hesitant wave. I didn't return it. Instead, I went inside and closed the door. I wasn't ready to feel anything yet. Hours passed. I made a grocery list I didn't need. I called my sister and told her nothing. I opened the laundry and folded everything with robotic precision. Then, just before sunset, there was a knock. Not at the door. At the back window. I turned and saw him standing there, just outside the kitchen. I opened it a few inches. "What are you doing?" I asked. "I needed to see you." "Now's not a good time." "I know. But..." I heard what happened. I froze. "How?" His face shifted slightly. Hesitant. "I saw your husband leaving this morning." He looked done. I didn't answer. He took a breath. "I know I've been a part of this mess. But I never wanted to break something. I don't know what I want," I said, cutting him off. He nodded. "Okay." He turned to leave, then stopped. "There's something I need to tell you." I waited. But he didn't say it. He just looked at me for a long time, then walked away. I watched him until he disappeared behind the fence. I closed the window and turned around to find my phone vibrating on the table. A new message from an unknown number. It was a photo. Taken earlier that day. Me. And him. Standing face to face at the window. Taken from inside my house. The photo stayed on my screen longer than it should have. I didn't blink. I didn't move. The window. My face. His. The timing. The angle. Someone had been inside the house. But I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I just stood there, phone in hand, mind hollowing out. I checked every window, every door, not for safety, but for logic. The house was locked. Nothing was broken. Nothing was moved. Whoever took it wasn't a stranger. And somehow, that made it worse. I deleted the photo and threw the phone onto the counter like it burned. But the image was already stuck in my head, perfectly clear. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing that felt like action. I changed clothes. I grabbed my keys. I walked out of the house like someone heading to a job they hated but couldn't quit. I didn't know where I was going until the road itself pointed me there. I pulled into the lot of a public park, the one with the old covered picnic tables and the faded playground. The benches were empty. The sun was low but still strong. I sat down on the edge of the stone fountain in the middle of the walkway. Minutes passed. Then footsteps. I didn't turn. I already knew. He sat beside me, far enough to be respectful, close enough not to be ignored. I came to check on you, he said. You didn't send the photo? He shook his head. No. I got it 10 minutes after you left. He went quiet. Then he said, then someone's watching. The words hung in the air between us like wet clothes on a line. Heavy. Uncomfortable. But real. I exhaled and looked away. I think I need to get out of that house. For how long? I don't know. A day. A week. Forever. Do you want to come to mine? No, I said instantly. That would only make things worse. Neither of us moved for a long time. The wind picked up. Somewhere behind us, a car alarm chirped. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I thought I could handle this, he said quietly. But I don't think I can. I don't blame you. You should. I didn't answer. By the time I returned home, it was dark. I left the porch light off on purpose. I moved slowly through the house, switching on lamps like little fires to keep the shadows away. Everything looked the same. Which made it worse. The idea that someone had been here and not left a trace, it crawled under my skin like a fever. I opened every drawer, every cabinet, every closet, as if the proof I needed would be obvious. But there was nothing. Eventually, I opened a bottle of wine. Not because I needed it, but because I needed the ritual. I sat on the floor of the living room, leaned my head against the couch, and let my body slow down. I stared at the ceiling until the wine was gone. The next morning, I woke to silence. Not just the absence of sound, but a stillness that pressed against the windows like fog. I didn't want to open the curtains. I didn't want to know if someone was watching. I just got dressed, made toast I didn't eat, and left. I drove to the library, a place where I could exist without being anyone. I walked through the aisles, fingers grazing the spines like I was trying to remember how it felt to focus. I took a random book off the shelf, sat in a corner, and stared at the same paragraph for over an hour. At one point, a woman asked if I needed help. I shook my head. When I got home, the mailbox was open. Nothing inside. But the lid hadn't latched properly. It hadn't done that yesterday. I looked around. No one on the street. No footsteps. No parked cars that didn't belong. I closed it gently and went inside. I locked the door. Then I grabbed a suitcase. I packed with no plan, 3 shirts, 2 jeans, a sweater, my toothbrush. No makeup. No books. Just what my hands reached for. And then I stopped. Because I heard his truck. The door closed. Slow footsteps on the gravel path. A knock on the front door. I opened it. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were puffy. His face pale. I need to say something, he said. I stepped aside. He walked in, glanced at the suitcase, then back at me. I've been thinking about it for days, he started. Trying to figure out where it went wrong. I didn't speak. I thought it was just distance. Just routine. But it wasn't. It was the way you started pulling away. Quietly. Slowly. Like a tide. I'm sorry, I said. I know. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. He placed it on the entry table. I can't stay here. Not now. I understand. He took one long look around the room. The walls. The hallway. Me. Then he left. I stood in the doorway long after he was gone. The suitcase stayed by the stairs. That night, I couldn't bring myself to turn on any lights. I moved through the dark like I belonged to it. I lay down on the couch, eyes open, listening for every sound. Just past midnight, I heard a knock. Not on the front door. On the window. I sat up. Waited. Another knock. Lighter. Slower. I stood and walked toward it, hands cold. I opened the curtain. It wasn't him. It was my husband. He stood outside, jacket zipped, face unreadable. I opened the door. He didn't walk in. I couldn't sleep, he said. Neither could I. I didn't go to my brother's. Where did you go? He looked past me. Into the dark house. I drove around. Thought. Then I parked near the neighbor's place. Sat there for an hour. My breath caught. You were watching? He didn't answer. Then, after a long pause, do you still want him? I couldn't lie. I don't know. He nodded. I came back because I want to try. My voice barely made it past my lips. Try what? Being honest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Swiped the screen. Turned it toward me. A paused video. My face. Standing by the back window. Talking. Laughing. The camera slowly panned to show him. The neighbor. A beat of silence. Then my husband said the words I didn't expect. That phone wasn't the only thing recording that night. The moment hung there, dense and fragile. The words he'd just spoken echoed inside me like a dropped glass spinning on tile. That phone wasn't the only thing recording that night. My throat tightened, but I didn't ask him what he meant. I didn't want to hear the answer out loud. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. I didn't stop him. He moved slowly, with the tension of someone who knew exactly how close he was to a decision he couldn't take back. We stood in the living room, both of us in the same house, yet miles apart. He sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on knees, phone still in his hand. The screen was dark now, but the image was burned into my head. Me. The neighbor. Laughing at the window. Casual. Close. Too close. He looked up at me. I should have said something sooner, he said. But I didn't know what to say. I kept watching that video, hoping it would explain something I missed in real life. I lowered my eyes. I wasn't spying on you. I set it up weeks ago, when I was installing the new doorbell cam. It was just a backup view through the living room window while I was testing the angles. I didn't respond. I couldn't. He stood. Walked toward the kitchen slowly. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, he continued. But it wasn't imagination. It was just clarity I didn't ask for. He opened the fridge, poured water into a glass, and took a sip. As if talking about this could be casual. As if we hadn't crossed the point where any of this could be cleaned up. You looked like you belonged in that moment, he said. Not with me. With him. I leaned against the doorway, my pulse steady but heavy. He looked at me again. Is that what you want now? I shook my head. Not because I had the answer, but because I didn't know how to explain the mess inside me. Then why him? He asked. I hesitated. Because I felt seen, I said finally. And I didn't have to explain myself to be seen. That answer settled between us like dust in a still room. He set the glass down. I can't be here right now. I nodded. He walked past me, stopping only to glance at the suitcase still sitting by the stairs. I'll come back in a few days, he said. I just need space. Maybe we both do. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. For a moment, I just stood there. Still. Frozen. Then I moved. I took the suitcase upstairs, opened it, and emptied it onto the bed. Folded everything. Put it back into drawers like I was trying to undo something permanent. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and stared out the window. The neighbor's house was dark. The entire street felt suspended, like time had forgotten us. The next day passed in fragments. A shower. A piece of toast. A walk to the end of the block. Nothing stayed with me. Everything felt like a placeholder. By sunset, I was in the backyard pulling weeds I didn't need to pull. That's when I saw him. The neighbor. He stood by the fence, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I walked over, cautiously, like he might vanish if I moved too quickly. He didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me with something between exhaustion and regret. I didn't send anything, he said quietly. I didn't record anything. I haven't been near your house. I know. But someone has. And I think I know who. I stared at him. He nodded toward the street. Yesterday I caught someone sitting in an old blue sedan. Same one I saw parked here a few weeks ago. Guy didn't even pretend not to watch. Who? He paused. I think it's someone from your husband's office. I felt my stomach drop. He continued. That night when I drove past after the park, I saw your husband outside. Talking to someone. Quiet. Angry. But focused. I didn't think anything of it then. I stepped back. So he had someone follow me? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe it was something else. I looked toward my house. The curtains, the walls, the life I thought I controlled. Everything felt hollow now. I turned back to him. I need to know if I'm losing my mind. You're not, he said. He stepped closer. But you might be losing everything else. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I found this in my mailbox this morning. No envelope. He handed it to me. Inside, a photo. Me. Standing on my porch. Alone. And written in small block letters beneath it. He's not the one watching you. I looked up at him, but he was already walking away. And just before he reached his door, he stopped, turned, and said, You need to ask yourself one question, what else has he been recording? Then he disappeared inside. And I was left standing there, holding the answer I didn't want to believe.